You know, my surname is pronounced Broughan, as I think you should know. Can I just thank yourself and the Minister for giving me the opportunity to speak on the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan. I think the Minister will be aware that there's profound concern from all residents around Dublin Bay at the proposed Dublin Array. So at least the production of this, very belated production of this plan, to have it in front of us is somewhat welcome, as indeed is the general scheme of the Maritime Area and Foreshore Amendment Bill. Unfortunately, Minister, as you know, many people who are interested in this area, like the Coastal Concern Alliance, believe it's an attempt at retrospective planning, and in fact it's attempting to shut the stable door when the horse has bolted, because as you know, by the end of 2006, 620 megawatts of offshore wind was approved for off-county Wicklow, I think by Ministers Fahy and Ministers Dempsey, and Minister Eamon Ryan in 2008, of course, came forward with significant price supports for wind, and then we had a huge rush of applications, and then astonishingly 99 leases for the Arklow and Codling wind turbine fields were sold on by Electricity and Treasury Holdings and Fred Olsen. So it is welcome at long last that we have this. I think it's a very disappointing document, Minister, and I've gone through it very carefully. I don't understand why you didn't think it would have been prudent to consult the public again about some of the aspirations and comments that are made in this about wind energy generally, and about the location of wind farms in Dublin Bay and off the coast. I believe it's grossly deficient document in that there's no cost-benefit analysis of wind, alternative renewable energy sources, or indeed other energy sources. So the economics of wind is nowhere practically discussed in this document. So in many respects, I think it is a very deficient document. And my first thing today, obviously, my first aim of asking for this debate today is that we would have a full-scale Dáil debate on this document and on this project. I think it has to be said also, of course, it's deplorable that there's two government departments dealing with this matter, yourself and Minister Hogan, the planning aspect through environment, the actual energy aspect through your department, and very often when you get two chefs, Cathaoirleach, you end up getting a dog's dinner, and that's what I think is happening in this regard. As you know, Cathaoirleach, I've strongly opposed the Dublin Array proposal because of the imposition of, I think, 145 turbines, some of them up to 160 metres high, just 5 to 10 kilometres off the South Dublin Bay coast, would be a grotesque intrusion, I think, on the environmental landscape of that area. I notice again in your document, and so far in the proposed legislation, I don't see anything about impacts on landscape. I made the case in my own lengthy submission on the Dublin Array, of course, that Dublin's whole tourism, its whole quality of life aspect as a great capital city would be greatly diminished, Minister, if we end up looking out at a huge industrial landscape all across the bay. Allied to this, of course, is the OREP, as we had before us. It can't be discussed in isolation. We also have the important area, the imperative of amending the current legislative framework. I mean, we've been operating under the, I think, 1933 legislation for the past, whatever it is now, 80 years. And indeed, when I was your energy spokesperson, I was calling for legislation in this area, as indeed I think you did yourself. And finally, after 3 years into the government, we had a general scheme of the bill, while the addition or the entry of oral hearings and so on as part of a planning process, of course, is greatly to be welcomed over what I would feel was the disgraceful granting of consents in the past. It's still deplorable that this legislation has not been passed, one of the many things, Cathaoirleach, that should have been passed, I think, in this House a long time ago. So, Minister, there is grave concern about this document. I think we should have a full-scale Dáil debate over a number of hours where we could tease it out, and where we could address the kind of issues that will emerge, not just, of course, on the East Coast, but on the West Coast as well, and to look at the whole role that wind can play in the future energy of this country.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. You have 4 minutes for reply.
Thank you to Deputy Broughan for raising this. As the House will be aware, Ireland has a landmass of about 90,000 square kilometres, but it also has a sea area of around 10 times that size, with one of the best offshore renewable energy resources in the world. The development of this offshore renewable energy resource is central to overall energy policy in Ireland. It can enable the generation of carbon-free renewable electricity, enhance security of supply and deliver green growth and jobs to the economy. Its development clearly stands on its own merits. Cost-effective harnessing of the potential for clean, sustainable, indigenous renewable energy resources, including those offshore that Ireland is fortunate to have in abundance, is crucial to reducing our dependence on expensive fossil fuel imports, reducing harmful emissions and delivering jobs and growth in the green economy. And that's why I've identified the completion and implementation of the Offshore Renewable Energy Plan as a key priority for my department in order to provide a clear and sustainable framework for the development of the offshore renewable energy sector. The recent communication from the EU Commission on the 2030 Policy Framework for Climate and Energy recognises that renewable energy has a critical contribution to make in the period to 2030. The proposal forms the basis for a timely policy debate on the next critical milestone for the EU on its transition to a competitive, low-carbon European economy for 2050. The framework as a whole will require careful consideration, and our central focus must be on reaching an outcome for all that is sustainable on both environmental and economic grounds. However, I have no doubt that the increasing role renewables will play in an integrated energy market for 2030 and beyond will present significant economic and development opportunity for Ireland's offshore wind, wave and tidal resources. These include the potential to export energy with the possibility in the future of participation in the European energy market. The long-term economic promise of Ireland's wave and tidal resources will also be realised with the introduction of ocean energy into the renewables portfolio over time, resulting in the development of an indigenous ocean sector and the maximisation of the wider economic benefits to be gained from the commercialisation and deployment of these technologies. The objectives and actions set out in the OREDP are fully aligned with EU energy policy and the challenges faced by our EU partners in creating a sustainable EU internal market for energy and achieving the transition to a low-carbon energy system that is clearly demonstrated by the communication on blue energy, published recently by the European Commission, which identifies the Atlantic seaboard as the area of greatest resource in the EU and the potential for the sector to create 40,000 jobs by 2035. Thank you, sir. It is with the goal of realising the economic potential of the offshore renewable energy sector in a way that is environmentally sustainable and takes into account the needs of other users of the marine environment that I've published this plan. The plan has been informed by a rigorous process, including the carrying out of a strategic environment assessment, followed by an appropriate assessment under EU Habitats Directive and involving my own department and the Departments of Environment and Wildlife Service. Also the Environmental Protection Agency and the Marine Institute. The OREDP provides a clear and sustainable framework for the development of offshore renewable energy, and it is critical to now move ahead with its implementation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, you have 1 minute for a supplementary statement.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Well, could I ask the Minister then to address, will he ensure that this House will get a full opportunity to discuss this plan? I noticed, for example, the Coastal Concern Alliance, they said about this plan that it should be based on a democratically agreed marine policy which maps out a future scenario for our seas, serving the public interest. As not the key point, Minister, we must serve the public interest and not have developer-led projects and something that enriches certain oligarchs and doesn't achieve energy security and low energy costs for this country. Secondly, would you respond to the point that I've made in relation to the two departments? Is it not the case that this has the capacity to be a disaster? For example, in another role I fulfilled and which I was talking about in this House before in transport, where you have the Department of Justice and the Department of Transport in charge of, say, road traffic administration and offences. The end result is very messy, deplorable, and has led to all kinds of anomalies. Wouldn't it be better if one of these departments, perhaps your department, would take full control of this, including all the planning aspect? Minister, do you think that you should go back to the drawing board, which is the third point, go back to the drawing board with this document and ask for your officials to come out with a cost benefit? For example, it's been estimated in the UK that the amount of jobs, in fact, that have been produced, they've now established an amount of wind which would fuel this country completely on their 45 wind farms. But it's something that costs us something like between 100,000 and 1.3 million per job, because you don't need too many jobs when the wind farm is up and running. And Siemens, of course, and a number of Danish companies are the main beneficiaries of the actual capital investment. So will we get a proper cost benefit of the whole area of wind and the likely cost structure of other renewables? And finally, Exchequer Supports Minister, you announced a number of Exchequer reports in your press statement at the start of that. And while it's valuable to research, obviously, wave power and other coastal locations, I mean, a key issue I have to stress again is how close these farms would be to the coast, because most people think that they're not economically viable remotely unless you put them on the sandbanks just off the Dublin coast, and then you're coming into a serious environmental degradation, and you're damaging the environment of Dublin. So the cost benefit of all of that has to be estimated. Our tourism industry and just indeed the benefit that citizens get in Dublin Bay North, for example, by being able to walk beside the seaside, or citizens from West Dublin and so on. So I'd ask you, Minister, if you can address those and ensure that we will have maybe 3 or 4 hours on this topic in the next maybe couple.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. You have 2 minutes for.
Well, Cathaoirleach, look, I'm very happy, and indeed I would welcome a debate on this, because I think a lot of colleagues in the House regard it as somewhat arcane, and in fact that should not be the approach to our marine wealth and to the possibilities of the contribution that might be made by not just offshore wind but wave and tidal into the future. As regards the belated publication of the report, well, it may have taken longer than one would have liked, but it's inconsistent to say that it's belated and at the same time ask me to put it out again to public consultation before it was published. I'm happy to have that discussion. In terms of the supports, what I indicated was that I intend to introduce from 2016 an initial market support scheme funded from the Public Service Obligation Levy, equivalent to €260 megawatt hour per megawatt hour, and strictly limited to 30 megawatts for ocean, wave and tidal energy that does not impose any significant material additional cost on the energy consumer. And there is work underway, Deputy, and there has been work done on the cost of wind energy. In fact, the EU communication paper of a couple of weeks ago estimates the marginal cost at a range of €1 to €16, €1 in the case of Ireland, and they went out of their way to record that, €16 in, I think, Germany, but don't hold me to that, at the other end of it. And there is some more work on the economics of it, because I think you're right, it is important that we clear that up. But one of the problems, Cathaoirleach, that there is, and I'm not referring to Deputy Broughan here, but there are all kinds of people out there who say that they're in favour of decarbonising the energy system and all in favour of renewables, but not these renewables and not the renewables near me. Why should we have onshore wind when we can have offshore wind? Why do we need offshore wind when we could be running with biomass or solar? And you're always a step away from committing the people who claim to see the merit of renewables, who claim to see the merit of exploiting an indigenous recurring resource, but not in my backyard. And
sorry, can I just say, Minister, you're
say again.
Sorry, Minister, can you through the chair?
Yeah,
Minister, you're over your time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. If that's the case, thank you.
Thank you very much.